Hello and welcome to the first in the PR Vision series, Crisis Communications in a Digital Age. I'm Philip Smith, Head of Content Solutions at PR Week, and joining me in the studio, I'm delighted to say I have a series of crisis communication experts. Jonathan Hemus, Crisis and Issues Management Director at Electric Airwaves, Paul Almond, Head of Digital Communications at the BBC, and Robin O'Kelly, Director of Corporate Communications at Everything Everywhere. Crisis communications, of course, is the issue at the moment in PR. Now, starting off, I'd like to set the scene by asking our three panellists their three top tips for crisis communications.
At Electric Airwaves, what we try to do is help organisations plan and prepare for crisis. And so the first thing I would say is that if 3 years ago you had a world-class crisis communication plan, you need to reassess that now and work out whether your reputational risk is very different in a social media age compared with what it was 3 years ago. Secondly, it's important to have an online crisis communication capability in place, both technically but also from a human resource perspective. But finally, while social media clearly is important, don't forget the criticality of your media spokesperson. Tony Hayward's experience showed that being really effective in front of the camera is still crucially important.
Yeah, I'm going to cheat a bit with this one and paraphrase Tony Blair with preparation, preparation and preparation. I do think there's an awful lot of value you stand to lose if you get crisis communications wrong, but the real trick is to get it right beforehand. An example of that is the relationships with the influencers, the bloggers, the journalists, whoever. They have to be in place. You have to have a dialogue, an element of trust wherever possible, so that you can get your point of view heard at an early stage. So preparation for me is everything.
So for me, it's about speed of acknowledgement and response. It's about staying engaged and following up until you're through it. And I think it's also about the opportunity that an issue management scenario might offer you.
Our panellists are going to now talk about some real-life stories and the learnings you can take from them.
I want to do something slightly unusual, which is to talk about some of the good things that BP and Toyota did in their recent crises. On the BP front, ultimately BP ended up with a really exceptional online crisis communication hub. All of the information gathered in one place, access to photos on Flickr, video footage on YouTube, Twitter feed, links to other useful sources of information. The problem, of course, was that it was too late. The opposing spoof Twitter feed already had 180,000 followers, but BP has ended up with a real world-class crisis communication hub there that other organisations would do well to follow. What BP also did well from an online perspective was it used search engine optimization and search engine marketing well. So when you entered oil spill into Google, it was BP's information that came up top of the list. Now, a number of people criticised them for doing that. I would say that is just good communication practice to make sure that your messages are heard. From a Toyota point of view, they made very good use of YouTube, putting their spokespeople on YouTube, getting messages directly across to stakeholders. And the other simple but very important thing that they did was they integrated on and offline communication. So to drive consumers and readers to their blog and to their Twitter feed, they used national press advertising to make people aware of its existence. So I thought that was a very good example of on and offline communication working harmoniously together.
So in the world of mobile, one of the most interesting issues management affairs recently was Apple and the iPhone 4 and how the antenna didn't work. What was interesting for me was a company which is very astute in its communications, as Apple is, spent quite a lot of time to come up with an appropriate response for this. Admittedly, this was a really big issue, but the speed of their response was relatively slow. And I think that allowed a lot of momentum to build up behind the criticism of the company and the device itself. what started out life as some very your techno people who really understood this, your early adopters online and the Twitter sphere, blogosphere talking about this, was allowed to grow into a really big media issue before Apple responded to it. And I think what that tells us is speed is everything, especially in the modern world of media.
What do we mean by crisis communications in the digital age? What does digital mean to us? Paul, what does it mean to you?
I think that at the BBC, towards the end of March, we had a situation where the BBC's website crashed in its entirety. And believe it or not, that was a situation that we had not prepared for, and it also happened late at night, and we were all taken unawares by it. And what we learned through that experience was that it was down for 1 hour. There was an acknowledgement of it by the editor of the BBC News website half an hour in, but yet we were still criticised for a slowness of acknowledgement and responding to it. And for us, that was quite a learning curve, actually. Corporately, we were acknowledging it and retweeting and talking about it thereafter. As a result of that, it made us think a lot, and clearly we would, subsequently put in a kind of a protocol for that kind of eventuality happening in the future. It's an extremely unlikely thing to happen for the entirety of the website to go down. The following day, there was another sort of learning for us from it, which was to stay engaged with people online, with people who were wanting to know what had happened. And we managed to get a blog up in explanation as to what had happened by sort of 10 o'clock the following morning. And the previous night, we'd also managed to get a blog up at sort of 12:30 at night, just to give a sense of, this is what has happened, we know this has happened, it's now back online, and we'll update you further in the morning. And then we did subsequent engagement as well. So it was quite a learning for us, actually.
And if I can add to that, I think it's interesting that organisations that have been through crises, they tend to end up with a fantastic ability to manage social media. The question is how quickly they're able to get that response ready. So the trick really is not to wait to the minute that the crisis breaks, but to learn from the experiences of others and to have those plans and processes in place beforehand. And it sounds like you guys responded actually very quickly. Other organisations have taken much longer to get to that point.
Interesting, actually, Robin. Whether you thought that was a common theme, that in this current environment, a crisis, in whichever sense, helps an organisation raise its game, but it's got to stay at that level.
Yeah, provided you react appropriately. But I think the speed thing is very relevant. I mean, as T-Mobile and Orange are based on networks, physical networks, and that's very important. We do have issues with the masts now and again, so there'll be a problem in a particular geographic area. Now, before, it was fairly standard that you would get a call from the control centre that would say, we've got an issue in Beaconsfield, this is the issue. And 3 or 4 hours might have gone by before that happens, but that's reasonable and you get on with it. Now it's someone will tweet it and it'll grow and we'll hear it, we'll see it before we hear it internally. And actually what that has meant is we have had to raise our game. So we do have to react pretty instantly. We have to reply to individual tweets quite often to say, this is the issue, this is why. We're changing the way we structure our website so people can do this online more effectively. So absolutely. It's changed the way we do it, but it's the speed which is, and it's a healthy way of operating. It's good communications.
Jonathan, is that a common theme then that you see with businesses, that their response to a crisis, if it is effective, that does actually leave the business in a better place for dealing with a future crisis?
It's no surprise that organisations that have been in a firestorm, they are the organisations that subsequently have the very best preparation, the very best plans of all. Adding to that as well, I think the organisations that tend to respond most effectively with social media in a crisis are those that are comfortable and regularly using it in non-crisis times. Again, it's very much like conventional public relations. If you've built relationships, if you're already engaged in regular two-way communication with your stakeholders, you just switch into crisis communication mode and it's a more natural process.
Robin, I'd like to just ask you about your business in relation to those, because your business has just gone through a merger of two big but separate companies, Orange and T-Mobile. Could you explain to me how you've managed to make sure you have the right culture in terms of communication, and what are the issues that come out of that, particularly in a merger environment?
We certainly have had our fair share of issues to deal with, and when you are going through a restructuring of two big organisations, it's often you're hampered by getting those processes in place. You know, sometimes everything isn't in the right place at the right time. We did have one specific to the restructuring, one issue blew up. National newspaper looked at the process by which we went through consultation and restructured, and whatever was written, there was a fairly negative impression left, which we felt was more negative than the reality, so we had to deal with it.
This was the notorious traffic light.
Yes, right, yes. It was. I wasn't going to reference it, but yes, it was the notorious traffic light. And it's a great example, actually, of how, again, this appeared in a national paper, but online and the social media world was very quickly picking up on this. You know, we put up a web page with a response, and so we could tweet back to people with links to the web page. There's all sorts of devices we could use to respond very quickly. And as a result of the speed of response, we dampened everything down.
It's been interesting to observe some of the bigger recent crises, like Toyota, like the Japanese nuclear power station. There have been suggestions, for example, that the Japanese culture has slowed down the communication. That applies to individual organisations as well, and those organisations that have a culture which prevents quick communication are going to struggle to protect their reputation.
You can't be too prescriptive. What you can do is have the process right. I'm lucky where I am, we have a chief exec who's very savvy about this sort of stuff and will react quickly with you. It's not always easy because you have to involve a lot of people some of these times, whether it's legal or technical or whatever. But speed is critical, and that's gathering the right people, having the authority to do that, to react as quickly as you need.
And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for now. I would like to finish by saying thank you to our three crisis communications experts. Thank you to Jonathan, to Robin, and to Paul for joining us and giving us their practical advice and tips. I would also like to say thank you to our sponsor, Electric Airwaves, and most of all, I'd like to thank you for watching. See you next time.